right, folks. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Um, Welcome to Esoterica live stream. I know I've been sort of doing a bunch of live streams recently, and that's because I'm kind of in this experimental mode when it comes to with Esoterica. And one of the things that I want to experiment with is getting on more folks on the live streams and having more discussions, and also beginning the process of having conversations with practitioners of esotericism. So this is another thing that we'll be doing here on the channel as things get kicked on and as we begin to move into that mode of experimentation. I'm really looking forward to trying to do some of the bridging of the esoteric academic side of things, and then more practitioners, but also having conversations with between other academics and scholars. So if you've noticed a couple of more extra live streams, that's why. It's just all in the interest of trying to one, build a community, which is the thing I'm really interested in doing, in sort of academic practitioner community, but also begin thinking through bridging the gap between this academic practitioner divide. But at any rate, hello everybody. Really glad to be back on. I haven't been on just a dedicated esoterica live stream in a few weeks, a couple weeks, and that's mostly because I've had other content to do in the meantime. But this week, it kind of works out to do one of these by myself, just because there's no way I was making content this week. As you guys may know, what's unfortunate is that COVID has gotten into our house, and my 3-year-old had it at the beginning of the week. My partner has it now, and I don't feel super great myself. Definitely have a tickle in my throat, and I don't know, feel weird. But so at any rate, yeah. So COVID is sort of making its way through our house. Luckily, our 2-year-old doesn't have it. At least I don't think they do. And so at any rate, it seems like it's working its way through our house right now. So that is the reason why, without childcare and basically being in quarantine, this week has been a little busy in terms of trying to get content out. But um, what I do have on the books, and I guess I'll talk about it later, is I'm going to be doing a really great episode next week, I think, on Ugaritic magic, Canaanite magic, which doesn't get the attention it deserves. We actually know a good bit about Ugaritic stuff, so I'll be focusing next week on an episode on Ugaritic magic, which I guess I'll talk about a little bit later on today. But at least today, for the agenda, as much as there is an agenda, is want to take some questions and talk about some of the recent content we've made here on the channel. And then I want to talk a little bit about antiquarian occult books, because as I suspect that the Venn diagram of people who are interested in esotericism and the occult, so if that's one circle, and people who are interested in old books, I bet that Venn diagram is basically a circle. And so I want to talk a little bit about collecting some antiquarian books and selling some, and sort of what my experience has been, as I'm a bit of a very small time collector of antiquarian occult books, and what that looks like when you're actually buying some. And then also to showcase a couple things I picked up at the New York Book Fair, I guess over a month ago, and talk about some of the cool things I got there. So folks may be interested in some of those things. So I'll talk about that about an hour into the stream, after I take a couple questions. But yeah, Bruno, thank you so much for the super chat and supporting the channel. Really do appreciate that. Thank you. But what have we been working on the channel in the past couple weeks? It's been a pretty fun several weeks. I think the big episode that we got under the belt was this really fun episode I did with Andrew over at Religion for Breakfast, who's just a great guy and really, an inspiration for me. But what was a really great episode with Jesus as a magician, but also thinking about other Galilean miracle workers. And one of the things I take for granted, I guess, and I shouldn't take it for granted, is that most people who aren't Jewish have no idea much about the Talmud. For whatever reason, the Talmud just doesn't get really studied by non-Jewish people for whatever reason. except for anti-Semites. Anti-Semites love to go to the Talmud and find all kind of the worst possible things in there and pretend like that's the totality of what Judaism's all about. But what was really great is actually going to the Talmud and going to the Mishnah and other sort of early rabbinical literature, the Toseftas and things like this, and actually mining out the fact that what we actually have in the ancient world are other miracle workers very similar to Jesus living in the exact same region that he lived in. And I think that that's very eye-opening, especially for many Christian people, because they tend to focus on the idea that Jesus was radically unique, that there was nothing like Jesus out on the market. But of course, the truth of the matter is, there were lots of more things on the market, and there are other characters out there that were very similar to Jesus. In fact, that's part of the reason why I'm not in the mythicist camp. I think many people have gotten um, they I think one of the sort of positions that one can have about Jesus is this mythicist position that he just didn't exist. And for me, it'd be much more likely that he did exist. In fact, if he didn't, that would be what would be surprising because he's so much like so many other characters that we have, like Choni the Circle Maker and Chani de Mendoza. So, yeah, and there are many more of these characters that are out there that are, Simon Magus and other kinds of miracle workers, thaumaturgists, and certainly in the non-Jewish world, but that we have particularly Jewish ones, which is really interesting. Is something I don't know. I think it was worth covering. And again, I find often that non-Jewish people have never heard of these characters like Choni the Circle Maker, Hanani Bendosa, Shimon Bar Yochai. And so getting them out there and showing, oh yeah, Jesus actually has a context, and the context of Jesus is actually much more complicated than simply Jesus was this extraordinary figure of the first century. No, he's actually fits right into the first century, very 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 comfortably, I would say. So, but what else are we working on? Last week we did this great episode on this little hermetic reader, which I'm going to come back to in just a minute or in a little while because I have another copy of it. And this copy, this little copy here, I'll come back to it in just a minute. This is not the copy that I showcased in the episode. This copy is actually from 1607, a little bit later, but this one is for sale. If you want this one, I'll talk about it in a little bit. You can get it. You may want to get it, and you may be able to get it, but I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Um, so old book stuff, which was a really fun episode. What else have we worked on? Wow, just a ton of stuff. I mean, we did but since the last live stream, we've done stuff on Maimonides, stuff on Gnosticism. It's really just been sort of a whirlwind of content. But I am glad that this week I got a little bit of a break, although break is a strong word considering that I was, doing childcare and nursing sick people. So, um, but, um, but yeah. So folks are asking, yeah, I feel basically okay. I don't feel great. It's in the house. I mean, I'm like, I'm pretty sure we all have it to some degree, but I had my booster and all that stuff. So insofar as I'm exposed to it, it's not so bad, but um, definitely not perfect. But Jeanette Waverly, thank you so much for the super chat and the funny dancing person. I think that's a lemon, which is funny because my nearly 3-year-old was downstairs earlier before I got on the stream. They've gotten really into cooking, and they're the ones that tested positive last Sunday, so they've been pretty under the weather all week. But they've gotten really into cooking, and so they were downstairs cooking a lemon. Not really cooking it. We let them do stuff on the stove with the frying pan, and they were cooking a lemon in a potato. They like to cook lemon in potatoes. Um, all right. Well, let's see. Anything else I want to say content-wise before I start jumping into some questions? Um, some super chat stuff. Yeah, we did the episode on the Talmud and demonology and the Talmud, which was a lot of fun. Those stories in the Talmud are pretty crazy. Stuff in the Ars Notoria, which is really a lot of fun. I don't know what folks think about the Ars Notoria. It would be fun to do a double blind test to see if someone just studying philosophy or whatever, all the work that goes into the Ars Notoria versus just studying. One wonders how it would come out in the wash if you were to, do all of that work. But man, the Ars Notoria is a mess. Although I am looking forward to this new edition that's coming out, allegedly coming out next year, which I haven't heard much about it, but I would like to see what it looks like when it does drop. So yeah, the Ars Notorias is really fascinating. Um, all right, so let me jump up to this super chat question. Thank you for that. What is the ultimate goal of Hermeticism, occultism, and magic? If the ultimate goal of faith and religion is the love of God, it's a good question. So I would say, and these are different, right? Hermeticism, occultism, and magic are all very, very different animals under the hood. For Hermeticism, the goal I think of Hermeticism is a kind of salvation. It is ultimately soteriological. It has to do with salvation, and I think it has to do with salvation in the terms of being um, reuniting is probably not the right term, but being united with the divine, with the singular God, the one. I think that is the ultimate goal of Hermeticism. It is straightforwardly about salvation, and I think that's also the reason why it fits so comfortably in many ways with early Christianity, and why at least some folks like Lactantius were much more comfortable with Hermeticism, because it's vaguely monotheistic, and the goal of it is a kind of unity with the one, with the divine. So in that sense, I think Hermeticism, it's very much about salvation, from the travails, especially of fate. One of the things I think that it's interesting that really troubled ancient people in a way that I don't think troubles us anymore for whatever reason. I think it's the influence of Christianity, really, is that the ancients were really troubled by fate. The idea that fate bound them, and that their fate was sealed, that really troubled the ancients in a way that I don't think really troubles us anymore. And one of the things that Hermeticism claims to be able to do is allow you to escape fate. And so that was a big claim of Hermeticism, and that's, I think, one of the goals there. Occultism has a lot of goals. It depends on what occult track you're on. If you're doing things like binding demons or angels, summoning angels, you may be after knowledge or power or whatever. So there's a whole wide range of things that would be in the occult sciences, like alchemy. So there's a wide range of things that would be the goal, I think, of occultism. It depends on which branch of the occult one is working in. And magic with a K, I think, particularly magic with a K, as developed by Crowley, that's to find your true will. To find your true will, and that is revealed to you by the Holy and Guardian Angel, which, depending on which text of Crowley you read, at least the later Crowley, seems to indicate that it is that it's God, that it's some kind of God, some kind of divine being. And so there, the point of magic is to shape the world in accordance to will, but of course to learn one's true will, that is a process by which one has to come in contact with the divine through the holy, via the holy guardian angel, or as the holy guardian angel. So a lot of overlap. I think Hermeticism and magic, at least Crowleyan magic, have a lot of overlap in terms of their ultimate goal, but occultism is a wide range of things, from the very noble. The occult philosophy of Agrippa, for instance, is incredibly noble. It is definitely about reuniting with the divine, one soul reuniting, communing with the divine. So that, if you look at Agrippa and the three books of occult philosophy, that's certainly what he's about. And there are other forms of occultism that are just about the most boring kinds of avarice, just getting people to fall in love with you, or I don't know, making money or something, getting knowledge without having to really study somehow. So there's a wide range of things that one could do with the occult. With the occult. Um, all right. So yeah, and folks, if you want to support the channel, lots of ways of supporting the channel. You can take a look at some a one-time donation via PayPal. You can definitely use the super chat option, which is just below the chat box. Those proceeds go to help making the channel possible, and of course, you can also sign up for Patreon. So if folks want to do any one of those, I obviously very much appreciate it. Signing up for Patreon really helps to sustain the channel long term, but every little bit helps, and super chats and other things are really, really great. And I'll make sure to get through any questions that get super chatted for sure. So please feel free to support the channel as you're able. But also, again, one of the things that's also true about esoterica, to be very clear about it, esoterica is always going to be accessible to anyone. The one thing that I absolutely want to maintain about esoterica is that no one is getting access to any secret stuff because they have more money. I never want a financial barrier to prohibit people to have access to this material. So any content that I make will be as freely accessible as I can make it. That is to say, you'll always be able to get it on YouTube for absolutely for free. And I never ever want anyone to feel like they have to contribute financially beyond their means in any way to get access to this stuff, because that's precisely why I made the channel, was because the ability to study this stuff academically is so limited, at least in terms of higher education, that I really wanted to make this stuff accessible to anyone who has basically an internet connection. So I never want anyone to feel like yeah, there's nothing behind the veil, folks. You can give me all the money you want, and if you ask me what the true meaning of life is or how to contact my holy guardian angel, I'm going to tell you I have no idea. But I can tell you where to go read about it. I can do that. So, a couple super chats coming through. We get to those real fast. So, Mike C., in a recent interview, you mentioned that you think this stuff doesn't work. As a practitioner, I've seen it work. How does that make sense? Uh, so, I guess what I mean, Mike, is I don't mean I don't think that it works. I guess what I would say is my metaphysical understanding of the world is a metaphysics that does not have any supernatural causation. So, um, so for me, I've just never seen evidence. I've never seen compelling evidence of supernatural causation. Now, depending on how you think about what is real and what is causation, you can have a widely different understanding of how this what is real. So, do I believe that people psychologically benefit from religious practices like magic? Of course, clearly they do. Um, but do I believe that that certain kinds of combinations of, I don't know, magical practices can cause supernatural causation? No. And it's not because I believe it or don't believe it, it's because I don't see evidence of it myself. Now, if I could get into a situation where we could do a double blind experiment or something like that, I'd be very interested in trying that. But I've never seen any evidence, compelling evidence of the supernatural. Now, have I seen things and experienced things I can't explain? Sure, absolutely. The world's mostly full of things I can't explain and are very strange to me. And there are things that we have experimentally shown to be true. Spooky action at a distance being one of those things. That's really weird. I don't know why that happens, and I don't think anyone does. But I'm not going to go the direction of a supernatural theory for it, just because those theories in the past have not worked and they have not been successful. But also, that's just my opinion. Like, it's one of those things where who cares what I think? I find it interesting that people become. I find it interesting that anyone is interested in my opinion about this stuff, as if, like, I don't know, I have a unique insight into the the uh, the efficacy of magic, which I don't. I don't have a unique insight into it. So, at any rate, that's just to say I don't. My metaphysics does not include supernatural causation, but it's certainly possible that I could be wrong about that. Certainly possible I could be wrong about that. Um, Also, it seems to make some people very angry that I don't believe in the supernatural. I get really angry emails almost every week from people just like fuming in anger that I don't believe in the supernatural or the gods or whatever. And I don't know why in the world that would make someone angry, but people become very angry at me for that, and I don't know why. I guess there's a lot of angry people on the internet. Joshua Lazarus, thank you so much for your super chat. Any thoughts on Manly P. Hall? I've never studied Manly P. Hall. I guess I've listened to maybe a couple of his lectures. Um, and I think what's interesting, I guess, what I've listened to his lectures is that he does represent kind of where things were in the early 20th century in terms of his best understanding of things like alchemy. And insofar as they're 100 years old, they're interesting. And it is cool that he was doing the work of trying to make this information publicly available to people um, in the early 20th century. But scholarship has come a long, long way since the 1920s. And it's one of those things where I think that weirdly, for whatever reason, occultism gets oddly stuck in the early 20th century. It's as if nothing happened. No, scholarship just hasn't gone forward since McGregor Matthews or something. People are out there still reading the Key of Solomon and the Goetia from 100 years ago, and those we know that those manuscripts are unreliable. We know that that text was just one of hundreds of manuscripts that we now know exist. And so it's interesting, and I think it has a lot to do with finances and academics and these things not being published. But scholarship has come a long way since then, and insofar as scholarship has come a long way since then, we should be updating ourselves and things like that. The same way that I don't know, A.E. Waite was a pretty good scholar and a pretty good translator for his day. Do I trust A.E. Waite now? He's not. It's not reliable anymore. No, it's not reliable. Those texts are not reliable academically. Um, Now, are they reliable ritually? Maybe. It would just be weird if the random one that they happen to pick from the Bibliothèque Arsenal or whatever, that just happened to be the authentic version of the Goetia when we have dozens of manuscripts of the Key of Solomon. That would just be weird and unlikely statistically, I think. And so we should be updating that stuff. I'll also say this. There are, I think, 150 known manuscripts of Key of Solomon literature, Clavicula Solomonic literature. So there are about 150 of those texts, of those manuscripts known through libraries in the United States and Europe and Canada. There's no critical edition of the totality of those manuscripts, and there's no real discussion of comparing them one to the other. And one of the things you will notice if you begin looking at these manuscripts is that the invocations inside them, uh, they're a mess. The demonic names, the goetic names are a mess. The spelling of them is all over the place. And it just one of the things that seems interesting to me is that if we take medieval people very seriously, which I like to take them very seriously, they really thought that language had a direct connection to reality. That language was not just metaphysically arbitrary, the way that we do now since Saussure. They took language to be metaphysically connected to reality, in some languages even to be superior to other languages in terms of their metaphysical power. And that's why Hebrew has this weird pride of place in a lot of these texts. What's worth noting is that if that's true, and if you believe that language has power or a connection, a powerful connection to reality, an ontological connection to reality, which is certainly true for medieval people, one of the things that would be weird is if all of those textual variants just didn't matter. I mean, if all those textual variants just don't matter, then that's something that's very strange. So it seems to be the case, and this is a thing I've always wondered about things from the practitioner point of view. And this is the thing I would ask someone like Denis from Foolish Fish or Marco Visconti or other Aaron Leach, folks who know that this is true. What do we do with the fact that the manuscript tradition is hopelessly scrambled, and does that scrambling have impact on the ritual value of these manuscripts? And if it does, what do you do about the fact that they are pretty hopelessly scrambled? And if it doesn't, that seems like a decisive metaphysical break with the actual medieval metaphysics that informs the very composition of those grimoires. And it's sort of a paradox. It's a bit of a catch-22 at some level, and I've never heard a really satisfactory answer to that. Um, I've never heard a very satisfactory answer to that. So I'd be curious to know. This is the kind of question I'd love to sit down with Denis or Aaron Leach or Marcus Visconti and other people who are practitioners and who take this stuff very seriously, both as practitioners, but also as scholars. They really want to get access to really high quality information. I really deeply respect them for that. And they produce really high quality, interesting stuff. But I've always wondered about what to do with the grimoire tradition. Of course, chaos magic just says it doesn't matter, but that's a real betrayal of the actual medieval ideas that went into these texts. So if it doesn't matter, that seems to be weird. And um, if it does matter, then what do you do about it? Esoteric scholar, can you talk about modern books expanding onto older manuscripts and grimoires? Can we skew the older perception with our modern thinking? And does it matter? So this is kind of what I was touching on just now. There are certainly people that do that take these ancient or these medieval grimoire texts or the Greek magical papyri and build them into modern practice of some kind. And it is an interesting question about how do you square two things, which I think are very complex things. One, how do you square the fact that we don't have systematic magical theories in the Middle Ages. We don't have systematic manuscripts in the Middle Ages. What we have is a field of manuscript traditions of which internally there is enormous variation. Enormous variation. Everything from the sigils to the magical incantations to the rituals, everything. And even within one magical tradition, for instance, like the Ars Notoria, just as an example, there is a huge range within the manuscript tradition. So one, you got to figure out how you would even pick which branch of magic, in addition to how you would square harmonizing this manuscript tradition internally. And the internal dynamics of doing that, I have no idea how one would do that. And of course, people have, this is the same problem in biblical studies like that, right? You have to take a whole bunch of manuscripts and then harmonize them to produce a text. And typically, you would really have to do that in a very systematic way to produce some kind of critical edition of, I don't know, the Key of Solomon or something. So that's at least one big problem. And how to do that, I don't know. I think you would have to have a hell of a committee of people deciding what goes in and what goes out. What is the authoritative name of these creatures, right? Is it Paimon or is it Baimon? Because the manuscripts sometimes have Paimon and sometimes it has Baimon. What's the name of the dude or person, demon? All right. So that's one of the problems. The second problem is the metaphysical problem. The way that medieval people believed all this worked, it assumes a worldview that we don't have anymore. It assumes metaphysics that we don't have anymore. And, or most of us don't. I don't think anyone is really geocentric, believes that the universe is basically a system of concentric crystals with, planets stuck in. Yeah, I don't think anyone, it assumes a world that's completely different than our world. And the question is, what kind of metaphysical assumptions went into those texts? And what kind of metaphysical assumptions do we not have anymore? And as much as you think you might know something about the Middle Ages, they were very different than us. They think very, very different than us. And so even basic things like what causation is or what motion is, when you think about motion, we have a fundamentally different theory of what motion is compared to medieval scholars. And that sounds really bizarre, but what Thomas Aquinas thought motion was and what Galileo thought motion was are two different things. And so even the idea of movement is so metaphysically different from medieval philosophy till now that one even begins to wonder, if that's really different, then what about much higher level things like the nature of these supernatural creatures? Which, if you want a really good analysis of supernatural creatures, by the way, you can read Thomas Aquinas' book on supernatural creatures, spiritual creatures. They're really interesting in that way. So that's the other side of it. And so I think that when you put these two things together, you're going to have a really challenging task to square the circle. And how to do that, I don't know. I'd love to be on the think tank of the people doing that stuff. Um, just from the philosophical point of view of like trying to solve those kinds of problems and think through what that means. But at the end of the day, I think that it's a lot more complex than people think. It's certainly more complex than picking up a copy of CLM 849, the Munich Necromancer's Manual, and just trying to do it. Because whatever doing it was in the mid 15th century requires a fundamentally different metaphysical understanding of reality than anyone currently has. No one, I don't think, has a medieval worldview. Thank God. Now, I really love medieval philosophy. I think medieval's actually got a lot of stuff right that we don't take very seriously, but they're real different. I mean, like I said, even things like motion, potentiality, causation, time, all of those things, we now have fundamentally different understandings of what they were or what they are. And when you map those things back onto a medieval piece of philosophy, much less a medieval piece of magic, um, it's the same word: time, movement, space, but not at all the same things under the hood. from a metaphysical point of view. So, any rate, that's sort of the mess. That's the mess, and I've never seen anyone try to work it out. I'm not, frankly, I've never seen anyone try to work it out. But it'd be interesting to see a modern philosophical approach to that. Of course, people work it out by psychologizing everything, right? That's sort of the way some people take the early. I mean, I think the early Crowley did that. He just psychologized everything, and he said, "No, this is all about parts of your brain, or the goetic demons, or parts of your brain, or parts of your psyche." And so they just psychologize it. This is a Jungian move, and that's of course a decisively important move in the history of 20th century magic. Um, but it sidesteps the metaphysical questions. And maybe that's the way you deal with it. You just psychologize it and you're like, oh, it's just about the psyche and the mind. And it has nothing to do with it has nothing to do with metaphysics at some level. Um, that's one way of doing it. That's kind of boring. I don't know. Can I say boring? Is that boring? It's boring to me. Because I like metaphysics. I'm a metaphysics nerd. I love talking about that stuff. I could do metaphysics all day, every day, but not everybody's jam. Not everybody's jam. Jacob Keyes, can you elaborate on the known history of the Testament of Solomon? Um, sure. So the Testament of Solomon is it's a compilation of Jewish legends, probably compiled sometime early turn of the millennium, 1100, 1000, um, and by Christians. So it's a Christian text, primarily made up of Jewish legends following stuff about Solomon. And what's interesting about the Testament of Solomon, and I think I've covered this in my episode on the Lesser Key of Solomon, is that the Testament of Solomon describes a lot of classical Jewish literature about Solomon, particularly him binding and controlling demons. And there's a little bit, just a little bit, of practical grimoire like stuff in the Testament of Solomon. And it seems like, and I think this is the going theory, and it's a theory I subscribe to, and I think other people do as well, is that there was a desire on the part of people that's completely reasonable, that if you read about how Solomon did all this binding demons and controlling demons, and there's just a little bit of practical stuff in the Testament of Solomon, mostly it's descriptive, not prescriptive, that just fires the imagination. And in the same way that when H.P. Lovecraft wrote about the Necronomicon and Cthulhu and all that stuff, it fired the imagination. And it fired the imagination so much that people created Necronomicons, like the Simon Necronomicon. People created it because there was something so powerful about it as an imaginary object that they felt the need, a compulsion, I suppose, to bring it into reality. And I think that's what happened with the Testament of Solomon. We have these extraordinarily lurid stories about Solomon. He's so wise. He had all these wives. He had all this life experience. He these great stories about him, starting to cut a baby in half and in the Bible. And he have all these really lurid stories about him controlling demons. And you get just a taste of some practical magical stuff in the Testament. And I what I think happened was that someone read that and basically developed Solomonic magic as fan fiction. I think of Solomonic magic as basically fan fiction, right? It's where you take the Necronomicon out of the realm of H.P. Lovecraft's fiction and you make one. And I think that the origins of Solomonic magic are probably in Byzantium, probably in the context of someone taking the Key of Sol or the Testament of Solomon and then basically writing something like magical fan fiction. And that literature originates somewhere in Byzantium and eventually begins to make its way over into Europe, where I think there's already indigenous Jewish and other forms of magic already there, and it gets combined in the Middle Ages, and we get the grimoire Solomonic magical tradition as we know it, with all the furniture and rings and rituals and the triangle of things like that. So that's, I think, the general known history of the Testament of Solomon, and how what is ostensibly a book of sort of Byzantine romance codifying a bunch of earlier Jewish legends, that Byzantine romance became basically the substructure upon which, or out of which, Solomonic magic was basically um, invented, I suppose. Yeah, invented. So I love that stuff. So great. Um, all right. which is funny because like the Lesser Key of Solomon is actually just based on Johann Weyer, the Pseudomonarchia Daemonorum, and I think most people never really know is that he wrote that book to make fun of people that believed in demons, and someone didn't get the joke or passed the joke on and played it even better. The Lesser Key of Solomon was literally just copied what Johann Weyer wrote as a joke and then made it serious, which is absolutely hilarious. So people take this Lesser Key of Solomon stuff so seriously with the Goetia and Paimon, and they, you have the hereditary and all this stuff, and people take the demonic stuff so seriously, but it began as like a joke. It was literally written by Johannes Weyer to make fun of people who believed in this stuff. Um, and I look at it, I'm like, and most people don't know this because they don't really read the history of these books, or they don't know them, or they don't know about Johannes Weyer. Johannes Weyer, folks, by the way, was an early skeptic of the witch trials, and also he was a student of Cornelius Agrippa. Now, I don't know many people in the history of Europe that would be more skilled to know about the occult than Cornelius Agrippa. I mean, he kind of wrote the book on it. And when Johannes Weyer thinks it's a bad joke, and that bad joke literally gets taken seriously when it's taken across the channel and put into the Lesser Key of Solomon, I just find that to be absolutely a gas. That I mean, yeah, it's like, I mean, the optimistic version of it would be me believing that the writer of the Lesser Key of Solomon was trolling people. It was just like the absolute best troll ever. It was something like it was something like a troll, and that and it got out of hand, and it got to where people believed it. So um so yeah, I don't know. That to me is always funny that that what began as a joke got taken seriously later, and now it's become like the ground floor for so much of um so much of modern occultism. But again, I'm not, who am I to judge? I just find it funny. It's just the irony is never lost on me. So that is the most interesting aspect of that stuff. I just love how history works. History is the most hilarious thing because when you study it closely, it just first is tragedy, then it's farce, right? I think Charlie Marx said, and yeah, I mean it's so much farce is in there, and so now that might be grounds for some people to like not take things seriously, but I take that stuff very seriously. Um, I take stuff very seriously. Oh, speaking of which, thank you. What is your opinion of people who report having quote magical experiences resulting from these jokes taken seriously? Um, I never. I'm. You. One can never tell someone that their experiences aren't real. People experience all kinds of things all the time. Just the other day, I'll give you an example. I was walking downstairs from my study here. I walked out the door, and I walked past the nursery, the room that is the nursery where our kids sleep, and swear to God, there was like a figure standing in front of the window, um, facing west, right, facing west. There was someone standing there, and the image of it was so clear that I walked right past it, stopped, and then backed up because I was like, "Who in the hell is standing there?" And it was just sort of a vague, shadowy figure standing in front of the window. This is in the middle of the day, not any weird thing, and I'd not been, I don't know, drinking or anything. It was the middle of the day, and I just stood there perplexed for a minute because I am fairly confident I saw something. Fairly confident, just enough that in my field of vision, I was like, "Who in the world is in there?" I stopped, I backed up, and no one was there. Right, seconds later. So now, did I experience something? Yes, I did. I'm telling you about it. Now, what do I do with that? Well, I don't know what I do with it. What I do with it is say, there was a weird experience. I can't quite explain it, but one of the epistemological, ontological, metaphysical principles that I have is Occam's razor. And Occam's razor just tells me there's no reason to multiply entities beyond necessity, right? That's actually Occam's razor, not the simplest answer is the most correct, because that's almost never true, and that's not what he said. But Occam's razor tells me there's no reason to to multiply entities beyond necessity. So, what was in there? No idea. But as far as I follow Occam's razor, I simply say there was no entity in the room. There's no entity in the room because I don't have any need to multiply entities beyond necessity. And what is more likely? That there was just a temporal, like a very temporary hallucination on my part. That's very possible. Hallucinations are much more common than people think they are. Um, or that I just saw something weird, or it was like just it was a strange shadow. Who knows? But that's the situation. So to go back to the question, what do I say to people who experience things based on these texts, which I think are not farcical, but at least ironic, at least ironic. Um, what do I do with it? I simply say, that's a really interesting experience. I'd like to learn more about it. I'd like to learn more about it. I'd like to learn more about your ritual practice. I'd like to learn more about how this worked. Do you know these texts were written as, like, this text has its origins as a kind of farce? Um, and then begin a conversation around what is metaphysics and how do we know what exists and what is skepticism and et cetera, et cetera. So when people tell me and they report to me, and people do report to me all the time that people have success in various terms, um, I'm skeptical. And what by skeptical I mean is that I simply withhold judgment. I simply withhold judgment, and I'd much rather be in a situation where we're working together to sort out what's going on. Because human experience is, at least in my experience, very, very weird. And so that's where I land on that. So I'm not credulous. It's not in my worldview to be credulous, but nor is it in my worldview to simply, because it doesn't resound with my metaphysics, just throw it out, just to throw it out. So I don't do that either. But what I do is withhold judgment. And when I withhold judgment, that opens up a space for conversation. And by opening up that space for conversation, I think then interesting conversations around metaphysics and other kind of history and the occult or whatever can begin to happen. So that's my general answer: is I am skeptical, but that skepticism creates a possibility of conversation. It doesn't shut it down. At least I hope it doesn't. At least I hope it doesn't. Um, but yeah, it could be pareidolia, like people say. Yeah, it could be pareidolia. It could be a temporary hallucination. It could be anything. It could be a ghost, right? I mean, it could be. It could be a ghost. It could be all kinds of things. And but again, when you begin to open this is the thing, right? And if you think about Occam's razor as the simplest answer is the most correct, some people would say something. And again, that's not really Occam's razor, but some people would say something like, "Well, a ghost is a pretty simple answer." Yeah, it is in language. It is a simple answer in terms of you have an answer, right? It's a simple answer in that way. But I think what people don't realize is that when you open the door to there being metaphysical entities, uh, like that, disembodied spirits or something, you have a lot more metaphysical questions to answer. You would have to answer questions like, where do they come from? How do they persist? Why do they seem to persist? What are their persistence conditions? Are those persistence conditions predicated on, what are they predicated on? Right? I have a pretty good idea what my persistence conditions are predicated on, but what about theirs? Are they bound by the fundamental forces of the universe, the physical universe as we know it? For instance, if they're non-physical, does gravity affect them? And if it doesn't, then how can they stand on something? Right? And if they can interact with our physical world, how do they interact? Right? And if they do interact, for instance, if I'm seeing them, right, they seem to be interacting with light somehow. So if they're interacting with light, how are they interacting with light? Right? What are the photons bouncing off of? And so you notice that when you give an answer like it was a ghost, which again is not logically impossible, but when you give an answer like that, you're now inviting, you just have a lot of work to do, a bunch of work. You know, the metaphysical task you have to do is enormous compared to, people have hallucinations a lot more common than we think. It was much more likely just a hallucination, um, or pareidolia, or whatever. I was tired and blinked in a weird way, and when I blinked in a weird way, the light scattered and something. Who knows? But my argument here is that when you begin to do that work, right, you have a lot more complicated. You just have a lot more complicated metaphysical work to do. And people think, oh, it's a ghost. Actually, is a simple solution. But I would argue, in fact, it's an incredibly complicated solution because it now requires you to do a bunch more metaphysics than you previously. Not just a bunch more metaphysics, you have to do a bunch more physics because you have to talk about what is if that entity is interacting with us, right, at all with our world. You have to talk about the nature of that interaction, and you can throw your hands up and say, "Oh, well, it doesn't really, it doesn't interact with our universe in any kind of way." But I don't think that's true. Um, yeah, you're not gonna be able to throw your hands up and just say, it can defy all the laws of everything we know about the universe. Like you can do that, but I think at the end of the day, doing that actually just it kicks the can down the road. And you're not actually being serious. So, at any rate, that's sort of how I take those experiences. How I take those experiences. All right. Oh, Jason, thank you, brother. A hot dog. We just had hot dogs the other day. It's funny because the reason why we knew that our kiddo had COVID was Sunday. We were supposed to have a grill. So the only time that we really eat meat is like when we grill, because it's like the twice a year that we eat this stuff. And and our eldest had a runny nose and was feeling bad, so we did the rapid test and they were positive. But we were going to have hot dogs, which I love hot dogs. I don't know, people like kosher hot dogs are delicious. I don't know why people hate on hot dogs, um, but thank you for the hot dog. I was told the McKenna translation of Plotinus is bad. What's the best translation and what's wrong with the McKenna? I've never heard the McKenna translation is bad. I mean, Plotinus was a terrible writer. I think even Porphyry admits to as much in the life of Plotinus. He talks about how bad of a stylist Plotinus was. And it is a pain to read the Enneads. It's not well written at all, and the Greek is just a mess. Um, I've never heard I've always read the McKenna translation. I've never heard of it being particularly bad. There is a new translation out. Let me see if I can find it real fast. I haven't looked at it. Plotinus, Enneads. Yeah, there's the Lord Garrison translation. There's another one out too, I thought. Is that the one that's new? The Garrison translation? That may be the one that's new. It used to be a lot more expensive. It's come down in price a good bit. But yeah, I think that this one, this Plotinus Enneads, I'll put it in the chat. I think this one is now the standard one over and against the McKenna one. But I learned on the McKenna one, so I've never heard that it's particularly bad. But anyway, here's the ISBN for that one. I do need to get it. It used to be like $100. Now it's only like 50. So it's come down. Need to get it. I should read it. All right. Let me see some other great super chats come in. Can you elaborate on the origins of the entity known as Metatron? Metatron is the best name ever. It's like the name of a transformer. It's like the Decepticons and the Metatrons. So Metatron is Enoch, right? In the literature, in the Enochic literature, not the Enochian literature, but the Enochic literature. Enoch travels into the heavens using Merkava mysticism and sits on the throne of God and then transformed into Metatron. Yeah, that's what that's the myth. So we have, folks know we have the first book of Enoch. There are also other books of Enoch, the second and third books of Enoch. I think it's second book of Enoch actually has maybe it's second or third, I forget, but it has the story where Enoch is transformed into he sits on the throne of God and then transformed into Metatron. Now, why does this entity have a name like Metatron? Who knows? It's clearly not Hebrew or Aramaic. There's no agreement at all among scholars about what this name means. And one of the guesses is it means above the throne, but meta doesn't mean above, it means beyond, really. So it's a weird name and no one knows where the origin of the name comes from. But typically the general legend is that it is the angelified version of Chanoch, of Enoch. Is there a good scholarly survey of metaphysics that you'd recommend for postgraduate level? Do you mean analytic metaphysics or continental metaphysics? Blah, 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 blah. Continental metaphysics, no. I don't know of any big systematic. I don't know any big systematic analysis of like everything from Heidegger to Deleuze or to Badiou. There might be one out now, but there was certainly not one back then. So I don't know of any specific one on continental metaphysics. I will recommend a really great. Need to move this water bottle out of the way. If you want a pretty good, look it up again right here. I just read this recently. If I can find it again. Hold on, folks. Sorry. Get this. Yeah, here we go. You want a pretty decent text, at least from the continental side of things. Take a look at this volume. This is called Philosophy for Graduate Students. This is sort of like what you should read if you're going into graduate school for philosophy. This is all the stuff you should know. But that's the ISBN. This text is called Philosophy for Graduate Students. It's really good. It covers epistemology and metaphysics, and it goes through all of the major things you would need to know, at least from the analytics side of things. Oh, hey Dan. See Dan Trails in the chat. Hey buddy. There is Dan. But yeah, if you want at least a primer on analytic metaphysics, that's a pretty good one. It goes into phase sortals and all the kind of things you would need to know about sort of where analytic metaphysics is. So that is what I would recommend, and it's really accessible and cheap. Well, it's not cheap; it's like $50, but it's very accessible. It's a little overpriced, actually. Sorry, but oh, and Dan points out that Metatron also functions as the active intellect in some later philosophers. So yeah, interesting. I did not know that. Dan, we should do a stream about the active intellect. We should bring on like a bunch of people and just do a whole thing about the active intellect. That is an example, folks. Going back to the conversation I was having earlier with myself, with y'all, how medieval people and us are completely different. The active intellect, which was the sort of divine intellect that activates our intellect in which we can commune with and live forever. And it's sort of like how we do prophecy and Maimonides and all kinds of stuff. That is just baked into medieval philosophy. Everybody accepts the existence of the active intellect. It is just baked into the nature of reality. I don't know of anybody who much people don't even have never even heard of the active intellect. So most people have never even heard of it. I've never seen the active intellect built into any modern system of magic. I don't think Crowley ever mentions it. Now, one could say that maybe the Holy Guardian Angels kind of like the active intellect, but I've never seen a modern theory of magic of which the active intellect is part of it. And there's simply no ability to understand the medieval world that produced the world of the grimoires without the active intellect being baked into it. Yeah, question. What is the active intellect? Exactly, right? The active intellect, I'll just say this very briefly because I don't want to go on a 5-hour thing about the active intellect. The active intellect, so again, this has to do with how metaphysics is totally different now than then. Motion in medieval philosophy is based on an Aristotelian theory of motion. And reject the Akashic records, return to active intellect. Yes, damn. So medieval philosophy understands motion to be the transition between a potential to an active state. That's the medieval understanding of what motion is, and it comes from Aristotle. Now, our mind is also a substance, according to Aristotle, and our mind has to be activated. It begins as a state of potentiality, like everything. It has to be actuated. Well, what actuates it? Well, it has to be a similar kind of substance to do the activating. And in what is perhaps the most turgid, complex statement in all of ancient philosophy, Aristotle has this bizarre section in De Anima. And the active intellect is the part of God right? It's God's. It's the part of the effusion of God's mind, which is always active. It's eternally active. That eternally active intellect activates our intellect, and one can commune with it via all kinds of various mechanisms, including philosophy and magic and other things. Um, and that mechanism by which we our intellect is activated, that is how basically we contact God. That is how we know anything at all, because without it we would never have a mind to know anything. But it is also how we commune with the divine via the part of us that is the most divine, our intellect, according to this philosopher. So the active intellect, from Thomas Aquinas to Pico, right? And Ficino and Agrippa and all of it, all of them accept the reality of the active intellect. And for most of them, the active intellect is the royal road to the divine. It's how magic works, how everything works. It's just not to be found in modernity. No one after, I don't know of any philosophers out after Descartes, with the exception maybe of like Cambridge Platonists and stuff, took the active intellect seriously. It was completely abandoned, basically, right? Completely abandoned. And without it, you just can't make sense of anything in medieval philosophy. Nothing. Agrippa, Pico, none of it. It all relies on the active intellect. And it's just a piece of philosophy that's totally abandoned. It's a piece of metaphysics, totally abandoned now. You will not find it in Deleuze. You won't find it in anybody. It's not there. Analytic metaphysicians, certainly not. And this is what I'm talking about, that medieval people, even the idea of what thought is for a medieval philosopher is so different than what you think thought is, right? Um, or the imagination, right? As an organ of sensation. That's another common medieval idea. It's a very different world. Very, very different world. So, oh, my shirt. This is a liturgy shirt. Maybe people will like it's hermetic, right? As above, so below. It's from the band Liturgy. But again, more black metal shirt, pant, yeah, more black metal bands. Although Liturgy's gotten really interesting with like opera and all kinds of cool stuff. Um, I got to meet her once in Brooklyn. That was a really cool conversation to sit and talk like high level metal theory um, with Triple H, talking about Krallis and stuff. That's great. Black metal theory is another thing I want to do some writing about. So anyway, that's an example of the active intellect. And how weird it is, and how utterly unlike modern philosophy it is. The Alchemist. Thank you. Is that Apocalypse on your icon? It's like the 1990s X-Men Apocalypse. The 1990s X-Men is the best X-Men. Have you seen the movie A Dark Song? Not only have I seen it, I've done an episode about it. You can go. I've done a couple of just movie episodes, which I need to do more of those actually. But I've done a movie episode about it where I kind of review it and talk about its connection to the Abramelin and stuff like that. So I've not only seen it, but I've actually done an episode about it. So you can take a look at that episode if you like. It's one of the earlier episodes I did in the channel. Oh, my buddy Russell is in the chat. Um, uh, Russell and I have been friends since middle school. We met in art class. I think that's where I learned to do calligraphy. I think we both learned to do calligraphy in that class. So Russell's been around for a long time. Oh yeah, someone mentioned Batman the Animated Series, which is also awesome. That stuff holds up really, really well. Um, um, all right, Michael Apple, thank you. Fairly new sub here. Hey, welcome, brother. Just take my money. Okay. Um, Worth it for the descriptions of the active intellect and the the jokes in Goetia alone. Rock on. Thank you, man. Yeah. Around here, we take things real seriously. And also that means we joke about stuff, because Freud said that there's nothing more serious than a joke. The jokes are absolutely serious. They're the most serious thing. And so we tell a lot of really serious jokes around here. So and then we get into the active intellect. I don't know. I wonder if anyone here believes in the active intellect. Dan, you believe in the active intellect? Are you still around? Dan Trail, the modern hermeticist. We need some active intellect, and sometimes it's called the agent intellect, which makes it sound even more cool. The agent intellect always makes it sound like it's like it works for like Shabak or something. Um, but yeah, I like when the agent intellect makes it sound like even cooler. But any rates, yeah, I'd be curious if folks who believe in the active intellect. Oh no, Jorge, I know believes in the active intellect because Jorge is the most Maimonidean dude around. He might out Maimonides. So Jorge, I absolutely do believe that you believe in the active intellect because you are the Maimonidean man of all time. So I can definitely see that, but be curious if other folks believe in it. Nah, Martin Morris says doesn't believe in the active intellect. I would. It's the kind of thing that I want people to believe in. I really I don't believe in it personally, but I just kind of wish that it were. I wish there was some person out there who like their jam was like, hey, we totally mucked up abandoning the active intellect. I'm going to bring it back. Um, and it totally makes sense that it's at least possible because we have panpsychism out, right? Like panpsychism um is now coming back in a certain kind of way. But one could even imagine that a certain kind of panpsychism could also be um very copacetic to the active intellect. Um and even versions of the fine-tuning problem, I think, could be solved with an appeal to the active intellect again. Which again, the fine-tuning problem, I think, is more of a problem than a lot of people let on. At least a lot of fake atheists let on. But but um, but yeah, I could see the active intellect being at least a solution to the fine tuning problem. Somewhat, it'd be yeah. At any rate, you should bring back the you should bring back the active intellect. Alexis, have you ever done an episode on Michael Mayer's Locus Severus? Pretty please. I have never done any Michael Mayer anything. Um, my call. Panpsychism is the belief that mind is what exists fundamentally, and it is ubiquitous. That is to say, that mind is that the universe is self. The universe is consciousness. Or at least that's one version of panpsychism. Um, I've not done any episodes on anything about Michael Mayer yet. Um, and I think that if I were to do one, I'd probably do Atalatia Fugians first just because it's so famous. And it's gotten a recent translation and stuff like that. So I'd probably hit I'd probably do Atalantia Fugians first, and then come back to what is it? How do you translate this? The severe joke, the serious joke. So I'd come back to it later, but it's a good idea. I just haven't gotten for folks who've followed my alchemy stuff. One of the things that I'm trying to what's the right word? Revisionism? It's not revisionism. It's actually just like there's this persistently incorrect belief that alchemy was about personal transformation, that it was about spiritual personal transformation. Medieval alchemy wasn't about that. Medieval alchemy was absolutely about transmuting metals. And oh yeah, Furnace and Fugue is excellent. In fact, you're right, Dan. That's a really really great book. And there's a whole new website out about Atalatia Fugians. There's all this new stuff that's out about it as well. Um, but I've been doing all this alchemy stuff because I think most people interested in alchemy don't know the historical stuff about alchemy, which is to say the mercury sulfur theory or the mercury salt sulfur theory in Paracelsus. So there's no, and this is the thing that I think Dan Atrell and I have lamented, is that often as people interested in esotericism have a really low functioning historiography. And that low functioning historiography can lead to all kinds of really bad misunderstandings about how stuff works. And alchemy is, in my opinion, is where this suffers, I think, the worst. Oh yeah, Alchemy and Authority is great. That's a great book, also, Dan, because it does one of the best analyses of entrepreneurial alchemy, which um, gets no talk. No one ever talks about how important like proto-capitalist alchemy was. And the proto-capitalist alchemy really, I think, actually gave rise to chemistry as we know it now. But my point is that it's so difficult to get a good historiographical understanding of what's going on in this esotericism world, and alchemy suffers from this the worst because the 20th century was basically several different wrong interpretations or not wrong, but historically inaccurate interpretations of alchemy. And Jung and other and Mercier, they just distorted most people's understanding of what alchemy was, and that distortion has led most people into a fundamentally incorrect understanding of alchemy. And um, and so when there was this pretty profoundly distorted understanding of it, my job, as much as it is my job, has been to undo that mostly by creating content to do the historiography of alchemy to land it back into a much more historiographic, a much more materialist understanding of what it really was. And that would include things like entrepreneurial alchemy, and alchemy as a practice actually in labs in the Middle Ages. So, so the reason why I haven't got to Michael Mayer yet is because I have to do so much more alchemical work from the 12th through the 16th centuries to lay the groundwork for when things get much more allegorical in the 17th century. Because in the 17th century, alchemy is in the 17th and 18th centuries, alchemy is undergoing its own internal revision and its own internal um, revolution. And that internal breakdown, there are people increasingly rejecting a bunch of the older medieval alchemy and using the symbolism of that to talk about other things. And this is another weird thing that people get, I think, wrong, is that medieval and early modern people made allegories of every damn thing. There were allegories of everything. And just because there were allegories of metals doesn't mean that they also did allegories of like geometry and stuff. And that allegorization that happens, and especially as it gets really, really turned up in the 17th century, it gets really difficult to tease out um, what the actual lab science is, and it becomes disconnected from it. And um, so the reason why I haven't got to the 17th century is because I really wanted to lay a very firm foundation about what alchemy was historically. Because when you get into this more stuff like the Liber Mutus and other stuff like that, when you get more into that more medieval stuff and like to the Rosicrucian stuff, that's where the symbology of alchemy has kind of gotten escape velocity from what's going on in the labs. And once it gets to that escape velocity, that's when you have to really get into a much more nuanced conversation about what those texts are and what they're doing. And I think you can't do that without having done the previous historiography. If you try to do it, what you end up doing is really misrepresenting what's going on in those texts by making it all about postmodern liberal self-help. And that's not what those texts are about. None of the alchemical texts are about that, except for Jung and 20th century stuff. Um, so, um, so that's what's going on. That's what's going on there. Um, but anyway, yeah, I'll get to Michael Mayer eventually. That will definitely happen. That will definitely happen. All right, let me get there's a couple of the super chats that have come through. Make sure to grab those. But hey, Jorge, is there a possibility you and Zevi could do videos of what Abulafia said regarding the Guide of the Perplexed? He wrote whole commentaries on it. In fact, he wrote 3 commentaries. I think that's right. I think he wrote 3 separate commentaries on the Guide of the Perplexed. And the answer is maybe. Um, I I have them downstairs. I have the complete works of Abulafia downstairs in the only really modern edition. Uh, and it's really still a bad edition. And they're only in Hebrew, and so it would require me reading Abulafia's commentaries in Hebrew, which would be a heavy lift. Frankly, a heavy lift. The guide is all as you know, is hard. Abulafia is hard, and reading Abulafia on the guide. I've flipped through them, but that would be tough. That would be tough. I wonder if Zebi be up for it. It'd be a real test of one's medieval Hebrew, that's for sure. But I'm fairly confident that he wrote 3 commentaries on them. Although I think Moshe Idel goes through and kind of mines out the juicy parts. But Maybe it'd just be a lot of work for a super niche thing. Again, this is part of the problem, folks, with esotericism is that there's just so much not translated. So much not translated. Abulafia's complete works are not translated. There's not even a really great contemporary Hebrew edition of them. Idel argues, and he would know, is that even the manuscripts are more reliable in many ways than some of the printed editions, which is just mind-boggling. But that is the world that we are dealing with when it comes to esotericism stuff. Um, are you familiar with the controversial black metal band Death Spell Omega? They cite Bataille as an influence and seem to have a Gnostic worldview. No, I'm not familiar with them. What makes them controversial? I mean, I imagine they're Nazis. And it's just like typically black metal when it's uh when it's controversial, it's because they're just Nazis. Um, but no, I've not heard of them, but I'll check them out. I'll check them out. Oh, they're French. There's a good bit of good French black metal that's come out. Um, Scandinavians get all the say, but the French produce some pretty good black metal. Blue Set Nord, I think, is a really great band as well. Let's see here. We'll got one more. Yeah, one day can you do a video on Johann Faust myths versus history? Um, VTM. What does VTM stand for? Oh, Vampire the Masquerade. Ah, interesting. I like when I show up in role playing games. That's very flattering. Thank you. I'd like to know more about my Vampire the Masquerade person. But yeah, we could do an episode on Faust myth versus history. That'd be fun. Um, yeah, again, one of these characters that is like Flamel, who has this really who has a really amazing afterlife, and who in real life wasn't terribly that interesting. I mean, Flamel less so interesting than Faust, but yeah, I think Faust has had much more of an afterlife, much more of an afterlife than other people, than Flamel for sure. Vale the Wolf, thank you. New here. Began my journey with the Gnostic Handbook, which led to the Divine Pymander and the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and now your channel. Thank you. Welcome. May knowledge and adventure always surround you. Yeah, knowledge and adventure. That sounds like a great D&D adventure. Um, yeah, thank you. Yeah, welcome. I hope you find the content useful, and yeah, there's a bunch of different stuff here. So yeah, welcome, and thank you very much for the super chat. Let's talk about old books for a minute. Folks interested in that? Let's talk about old books for a minute. And if folks want to continue any super chat questions, I'll get to them. But let's talk about old books. So, as folks may know, for following the channel, I collect antiquarian books. I have a very modest collection, but I also subsidize my collection of antiquarian rare books and occult books by by buying and selling them, right? So I have a small little rare book operation called Esoterica Ex Libris, and I deal and I sell rare books. I sell antiquarian books about esotericism and the occult. And what I try to do when I do that is I try to make some of these books accessible, because the rare book world is one of the most esoteric and inaccessible hobbies one can have. But about a month ago, I was in New York for the Antiquarian Book Fair, and I'd been saving to go to this book fair for like 3 years, right? So I've been saving. I have like a little tiny savings account that every month I put some money into, so that when I don't look at it, so that when I go to the Antiquarian Book Fair, I just can have a budget, and that's my budget. And it's great when your online bank allows you to basically make like tiny little micro savings accounts, so you can just like move your money around with it. All right. So at any rate, what I want to do is show a couple of the books that I got from the Antiquarian Book Fair, because I don't know about y'all, I love old books. I love old esoteric books. There's something about handling them that is just absolutely yeah, just delightful. So the first thing that I picked up there is one of the cool things you can get are these. This is, and I'm not sure if the glare is going to let me do it. Let me see if I can take it out of the little plastic so the glare won't be so bad. But this is a tiny leaf of a medieval manuscript, right? It dates from about the 16th century, maybe the 15th century, probably from France. This is on parchment, on vellum, so handling it doesn't really hurt it. I'm not going to really touch the gold leaf and the ink there, but this is an example of a real manuscript copy from the probably the 15th century, probably France. What was interesting about this text is that the people who sold it to me, you can get these relatively inexpensively. They thought this was from a psalter. They thought this was from a psalm. The psalm psalters are a dime a dozen. You can get them very inexpensively. But when I picked it up, I was looking at it and then reading it because I have some calligraphy background and I can read medieval handwriting. I realized it was not from a psalm. In fact, from this describing the crucifixion of Jesus. It's from a gospel. And so when I was reading it closely, you can see the part where it actually says, and let's see if I can zoom in on it. If you look carefully, I don't know how well the camera is going to pick it up, and it's backwards for you all, so it's going to make it even more hard to read. But there on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, ninth line, pause it later and reverse it, I guess, if you want. It says famously, Ecce homo, right? Ecce homo. And that's Pilate, right? Behold the man. Behold the man. So this one is a cool little find because it actually contains sections from the gospel. Now, you're wondering, why is it torn out like this? I can guarantee you that the booksellers do not disassemble books to sell them like this. No ABAA, none of the bookseller associations would ever allow anyone to slice apart a medieval manuscript to sell it for pages. These are ones that have naturally come apart. And this is just an example of one of these that's come apart. But it's neat because you can still see the gold leaf. If I can move it around a little bit, you can still see the gold leaf, a tiny amount of gold leaf. But yes, no books were harmed in the extraction of this leaf. Books naturally fall apart over the centuries, and they get sold as pages. But yeah, the booksellers there are all ABA. None of them are going to disassemble a book to sell it. Just that bindings fall apart. And this is where things go. So cool little manuscript leaf. The other thing that I picked up is that's really cool and worth, I think, is this. This is the 2-volume early 16th century Agrippa opera, right? Agrippa opera. So this is everything Cornelius Agrippa wrote. This is everything by Cornelius Agrippa. This is really cool. So as you probably know, Agrippa published famously his 3 books of occult philosophy in 1533, originally written around 1510, the juvenile draft at least. But once he died, his entire works were bound together. Now, that would include all the stuff like De Immunitate, on the vanity of the arts and sciences, but of course also it includes the very famous texts that we all know and love, right? The 3 books of occult philosophy. These are the famous sections from I think book 2. Sorry, it's not really getting good focus, right? Maybe if I hold it a little further back, but yeah, you can see some of the planetary sigils from Agrippa. Let's see if we can find. I'll show you also something really cool about this volume as well. This is printed. We don't know exactly when it was printed because there's no date mark on it. Probably sometime in the 1630s is the best bet we know of. But of course, you find these really famous images, right? And really famous images here from Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. One of my favorite sections when I was a young person, younger than I am now, were the sections with the various alphabets. Let's see if I can find them in here. These also contain these really cool charts. I want to be careful pulling these out because these are very delicate. but it also contains these really great charts for doing all the calculations for gematria and stuff. So you can see here, these charts pull out. And of course, it's not showing up anything because it's well, here we go. Yeah, the lights are just washing everything out. Sorry, folks. Yeah, it's just all washed out. Maybe I'll bring it up closer. Yeah, some of the charts for gematria stuff. Sorry, it's so washed out. I don't know why the lights are doing that. But let me see what else is in. Of course, this is all the famous stuff. Now, what's also really cool about this volume, oh yeah, this is what I was telling you about. So the sections here on these alphabets are weird because on the pages with some of the esoteric alphabets, let me find them real fast. Sorry, folks, hold on. Hold on. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm not seeing it now. I'm flipping through it rather rapidly, but someone was really interested in them. But now I can't find it. Anyway, if I find it in a second, I'll show it. But there's like weird stains on the pages. It looks like sweat or something, but it's not blood, I don't think. But there are definitely weird stains on the pages with these interesting alphabets. Let me find it. I should be able to find it relatively quickly. I think it's in book 3. I'm not gonna be able to find it now. Sorry, folks. At any rate, I'll take my word for it. Oh, there they are. Yeah, so we get to the cool. Yeah, here's these great images of the alphabets, the crossing the river alphabet, and other alphabets. Right. Um, Notice the weird stains on this page. I don't know what that is, but it's only on this. It's only on this page, and I don't think it's blood. It's not dark enough to be blood. I don't guess. I'm not a forensic pathologist. It looks like sweat to me, but it's only on these pages with these. Yeah, I guess I could use. I have a UV light somewhere here. Actually, could put luminol on it and test it. I don't know. Maybe I don't want to find out. But at any rate, in addition to the 3 books of occult philosophy, this is also cool because it contains the 4th book. So this contains the 4th book of occult philosophy, the spurious 4th book, which you can see here, the book of geomancy, which Agrippa did write actually. And so you can have the 4th book of occult philosophy, but it also contains the other stuff, which is really neat, which would include Peter Albano's Heptameron. So you can see some sigils there. Samiel, right? So you can see there from Samiel. So this contains the Peter Albano's Heptameron, which I can find the really cool. Yeah, here's the famous hexagram, right? All right, people want me to use the black light. I have to go find it and see if it really works. If people really want me to do it and go find my black light flashlight, I will do it and see if it actually fluoresces. Because I do have a black light flashlight, and you've seen it in the episode because I have it on some of your Vaseline glass that lights up if you put it in a black light. But it contains like the Arbitel, and some other great things like this. So at any rate, this is just a really cool little volume containing a pretty vast array of magical texts, and also Agrippa and things like this. And also the binding is really cool in these too. This is all hand done. Binding, hand lettered, and really, really beautiful. Probably by a doctor, actually, was the going theory. All right, everybody wants me to find my black light flashlight. Let me see if it's back here somewhere. You guys are hilarious. Where did that? It's here somewhere. I would have. Oh, there it is. All right, folks. Be back in a second. All right. All right, folks. I have my right ear in now. I have the wrong ear in. All right, let's do some forensic. Let's do some forensic analysis of this text real fast. All right. Let me find the right page. All right, live to see if anything happens when I use the black light on the mysterious stains in Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. This is what I do with my life. All right. I really hope it's not some evil stuff. I really don't need any more evil in my life. I have just the enough. All right. All right. Black light. All right, folks. Let me see if I can show you. See what happens. All right. I'm shining it on the stains, and it is not fluorescing. Oh, there's some things are fluorescing actually. In the paper, little dots of things are fluorescing. I don't know what those are. No, but the actual stains not fluorescing. I don't know if you can see it in the thing, but from at least from here on the camera, they're not fluorescing. I don't know, man. But who knows what it is? Who knows what it is? But yeah, maybe. Yeah, I wonder if I can take it to like a forensic person and have them test it. But yeah, maybe it's. I don't think it's. I think it's sweat. But I could just be water. He just like spilt his beer on his book. How many times have I spilt beer on books? Plenty of times. At any rate, 2-volume Agrippa. Now, I want you to compare that to, right? So here's another little volume I'll talk about in a second. So, yeah, it could be raindrops. Yeah, you're right, Andrew. It could be. So here's the Agrippa volume, right? Ah, look at this big beast. This, folks, is a giant tome. That is the complete works of Philo of Alexandria, right? Put on my shoulder, right? Just to give you some sense of the book comparison size. This is the complete works of Philo from, as you can probably see on this thing here, 1652. 1652. Ugh. Things beast, folks. That's why I lift. But what's cool about this, there's lots of cool things about it. I'm gonna drop this book. I'm sure this thing is so damn heavy. What's cool about it, there's many cool things about it, is one, this really cool frontispiece. It's like a cool boat, right? Yeah, look at this cool boat, huh? All right. But why this book is so thick, and that's THICC, if you're curious, thick, right? Is because it is printed very large, 12-point font, and it is printed with the Greek and the Latin translation facing. So you can see the Greek and Latin, right? And what's really cool about it is that if you flip to page 735, yes, page 735, you will get to the place in Philo's book, De Creatione Principiis, right? In De Creatione Principiis, where Philo argues Quicquid inum apud non peccat est inequalitas, quicquid non discredit ab officio, equalitas opus est. That is to say, equality is the work. That is the work of government. And in civitatibus optimum, in the ideal city, and maxime legitam, republican, the one that is maximally ruled by laws, that species speciem democratium. It's the first time, to my knowledge, in any ancient text where a philosopher argues that democracy is the best system of government, right? Why democracy is the best system of government? It's in Philo, right here on page 735, De Creatione Principiis. Philo, I think for the first time, argues in the history of philosophy for democracy as the form of government that he thinks is ideal. So it's cool because it's thick, THICC, but it's also really cool because of Philo. Like, Philo is super important in all this, folks, right? Philo is super important in all this because without him, we don't get all kinds of stuff that we would need to have in our philosophy. And so, well, now again, whether you like democracy or not, I have all my criticism of democracy as well, right? And also, I really like the Republican principle. But at any rate, this is the first time, not in this specific book, obviously, but this is the first time that it is articulated as such. So Philo, folks, Philo. Now, is Philo esoteric? Not really, but are we going to have any form of esotericism without him? Probably not. He's like the poster boy of Middle Platonism, and so we need him. Anything about the dictatorship of the proletariat? No, that's toward the back. It's toward the back. So now, last little book that I want to mention before I finish show and tell. This, for the folks who've been watching the channel recently, if you watched last week, I did a whole episode about this book. This is a little reader that I did the episode on. And Dan did a follow-up actually on doing a reading of On the Hieratic Arts. This is not the copy that I featured, but this copy I actually have for sale. So I scoured over where my rare book resources, and I found one copy. So this is actually a copy of that book. It's not the one that was featured in the episode, not the one I had, but it is the exact same book, and it is complete. In fact, this one's even neater in some ways. Neater. So this one's from 1607. If you're curious about the 1607 is where it's from. But what makes it even cooler is that the one that I have is earlier, and this one at the very end has this super dope picture of Iamblichus in it. Isn't that cool? There's Iamblichus. He's like hanging out, right? It says the Pythagorean Iamblichus. There he is. So one of the cool things about this book is all the things I said about it last time on the episode. It has all the same text. It has all the text from Michael Sellis, the text from the Proclus's commentary on the Alcibiades. It has On the Hieratic Art. It has the Corpus Hermeticum. It has all those texts. So this one I actually have for sale. If you're interested in acquiring it, there is a little bit of damp staining. I haven't really got exactly what price I want to let it go for, but if you want it, go to my website, justinsledge.com, and shoot me a message. And if you're curious, it'll be somewhere. My guessing is it'll be somewhere in the $1,000 range, probably. If you're curious. Now I know $1,000 is a lot of money, but it's also a book from 1605. So these books are rare. They are, very, very rare. There's only probably 100 of these in the world, probably, and it's neat. It's like merch, but you get a really cool book. But whatever. If you're interested, let me know, and I'm happy to I could be open to haggling. But yeah, somewhere in the $1,000 range, I think is probably what this will be worth. 1607 is pretty early, actually, which is pretty nice. But there is a little damp staining to it, but it is complete. So I don't know. Yeah, it's like someone got it wet. Again, more weird wet stuff in books. Um, um, Weird wet stuff in books. So, but yeah, this one does have a little damp staining in it, but I don't think it's blood. There, let me check. No, whatever it is not fluorescing. But some stuff in the paper does fluoresce. I really wonder what that is. It's like particles in the paper is fluorescing. I don't know what it is, but it's weird. At any rate, Iamblichus. Iamblichus. You can have this volume. I do have it for sale. Um, and also, Patreon folks get a discount on these, just FYI. So if you sign up for Patreon, you I think get a 10% discount or something like that. And you get them obviously vetted by me and etc. All right. All right. Let me see some folks left super sticker. Thank you, NK. Um, for the the limit super sticker. Appreciate that. Thank you. But at any rate, that's some old books, right? That's old books. I have several more over there, and I have some more on my website for sale. And basically, again, I don't make a ton of margins on these books. I'm not making a living on them for sure. But it does give me the ability to subsidize my own hobby of collecting rare books by getting some of them and making them available. And again, the cool thing about it is you don't have to do all the digging around in rare book places to find them, because they are very, very difficult to find. And knowing that they're complete, or that they're in the correct condition, and that they're not I don't know, pilfered somehow, and you'll do this. But at any rate, your chance to own a piece of history, if you should so like. Um, if you're curious about my little collection, it's there. Those are some of the rare books that I have, mostly from the 17th century, but I have a few from the 16th century. Um, does a book handled by Dr. Sledge have extra magical powers? Yes, probably. You can think of it as like expensive merch, basically. I need to do real merch, maybe. I don't know. I like t-shirts and stuff. I don't know. I don't know if people would actually like that, but maybe esoterica merch one day. I don't know. Let me jump up and grab some questions. Let me jump up and grab some questions. But yeah, antiquarian books, folks. It's a hobby of mine. It would be neat to, having modern books is great, but having really old ones is just sort of, I don't know. I'm not a mystically inclined person, but there is something just magical about handling a copy of Agrippa from the 17th century. And this is the kind of thing that a practitioner. This is the kind of thing that a person who really wanted to get into practicing uh, magic in the occult in the 17th century. This would have been the book they would have picked up. They would have picked up this. They would have gotten Agrippa's Occult Philosophy. They would have gotten Peter Albano's The Heptameron. It's basically a gold mine of it's some really cool stuff from the Arbitel. I mean, there's just something about having access to these old volumes that's just transporting. And even like I feel depressed or something, or feel sad or whatever, I can just go crack one of these books open and just spend some time with it, reading it, and it just makes me feel um, happy. Is that the right word? Happy. Oh, the Ars Notoria. There's the image of memory. I think that's what that's referred to as. Um, That's the only diagram in this version of the Ars Notoria, which is interesting because it doesn't occur in any of the manuscripts of the Ars Notoria, with the one exception, which is is a manuscript found in the Ritman Library in Amsterdam, and it comes from there, and no one really knows how it got from. Um, and this is also folks who are interested in early modern occult stuff. If you've ever seen the Robert Turner editions of the Ars Notoria, the Heptameron, and all those, the fourth book of occult philosophy, they all come from this edition. So Robert Turner had this in Latin, and then in 1656, when he translated, for instance, the Ars Notoria from Latin into English, he was using this exact volume, not this exact volume, but this edition for his edition to produce the Heptameron and all those books into English. So if you're just interested in that world of mid 17th century John Dee land kind of that's a little after D obviously, but that kind of world, then you could it's where those things are coming from. Um, let's see. Thank you. Would you do a video on sci-fi writer PK Dick's Gnostic Visions, the giant tome that is? Um, yeah, you called yourself a metaphysical skeptic when mentioning Legati. Can you elaborate? No, not a metaphysical skeptic. I should have said pessimist. I'm I uh, I'm what's the right way of putting it? I'm very seduced by metaphysical pessimism, which is to say that Legati and Schopenhauer and those guys, something deeply rings true to me about that. I don't know that I believe it, but I'm seduced by it. Metaphysical pessimism. This would include, like I said, Schopenhauer, Legati, his conspiracy against the human race. Um, Something about that is very seductive, and um, not because I'm a dour person or anything like that. I don't think I'm a dour person, but yeah, even the Gnostics, like reading some Gnostic stuff. That's part of why I've always liked Gnosticism, is the idea that the world is somehow bad. Um, but yeah, I find that those ideas terribly seductive at some level. But I'm not. Yeah. At any rate, so that's what I would say about Thomas Legati. But yeah, PK Dick, that's just like a huge thing to bite off. Um, maybe I could work with an expert on him, but that would take me years to work through all that stuff. I think years to work through all that stuff. Um, yeah, yeah, and there's like a whole trifecta, and then you can drift off into scarier land. I don't know, like Nick Land, with his like evil accelerationism stuff. Um, which I don't know why. I don't know what. There's something about. There's a certain kind of person attracted to Nick Land, in that world, and I've never. Yeah, I've never. Yeah, I just never have found it that terribly attractive. Um, yeah, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, the Nick Land stuff is just like, yeah, people get really. It's like edgecore stuff. I don't know. I never really got the mystique behind all that stuff. Never really got the mystique behind it. All right. Let me see here. 1 hour and 42 minutes. I'm going to stay on for 2 hours, so I have about 15 minutes left. So I'm just going to randomly search around to see if I see any questions that are not super chats because that are seem especially interesting. I can only go up so far, folks. So sorry if I missed your questions. All right, let's see here. Let me scroll back down. Yeah, because I lose this. I lose the chats as it goes up. Do you ever find that the lyrics of modern rock and roll to have a part in esotericism? Yeah, definitely. Like modern esotericism is like super saturated with music and heavy metal and stuff like that. Yeah, oh yeah. Um, I don't know. Like my favorite thing to do in the summertime is like listen to Led Zeppelin records. Like I love to like just like on a hot day, just like spin Led Zeppelin records, and it's just like hilarious. Like how enmeshed there's like occultism stuff there, and um, yeah. So yeah, of course, no, even like liturgy is really wrapped up in that stuff as well. A lot of black metal that I like is wrapped up in that. The new Tool album, the most recent Tool album, is basically like a Platonic or Neoplatonic um, record in many ways. So much of the lyrics there are very Platonic sounding, Neoplatonic sounding. Pneuma is a very Neoplatonic song. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, all right. Have I ever seen The Ninth Gate? Am I a book detective? I am not a book detective. No, I collect a little bit of those books, but I'm not a book detective. But I do like The Ninth Gate. That is a great movie, and yeah, it sounds like a fun life. I don't know, maybe not being like tracked by evil culty people, but yeah, Yeah, Pneuma is very Gnostic. Yeah, I agree. It strikes me as a very like Platonic song. Not Gnostic so much, but that that but really more Neoplatonic at some level. Um, yeah, Jason asks, do you think Iamblichus was setting up a rival Theos Aner, yeah, model in his Pythagoras Bioi to counter Christian headway by the third century? Yeah, it's a good question. I think this is a great question. To what degree was Neoplatonism? To what degree were the later Neoplatonists, Iamblichus, Porphyry, Proclus? To what degree were they self-consciously trying to deal with the rise of Christianity? It's a great question. They had to have been like self-conscious of it. There's no way that by Proclus they must have known it at some level that it was up and coming. Um, so yeah, I do think that you do have attempts at neo paganism, or you do have attempts in the late pagan world to provide counters to Jesus. In fact, I think Porphyry at some level is setting up Plotinus kind of in that way as well. And so that he has this, he has these mystical visions, and he's ashamed to have a body, and he did all this stuff for orphans or whatever. That he has this sort of saintly kind of hagiographic character. So yeah, it has to be the case that these guys are trying to beat Christianity at some level at its own game, and failed miserably. Um, failed miserably. Um, yeah, Christianity was very successful at doing the things that doing the things that it was good at, which is building community and um, opening hospitals and stuff. I mean, it was really good organizing. The pagans were terrible organizers. The Christians really just outbeat them at everything. Which isn't a weird thing. I think a lot of pagans really have this real hatred of Christianity because they think of Christianity as like usurping their religious beliefs. But those people converted of their own free will. Christianity was very attractive, both financially and it's like the European Union, like everyone, or NATO or whatever. Like at some point, people wanted in. People wanted in for all kinds of reasons. But it's definitely the case that Christianity became an attractive option to millions of people over hundreds of years, thousands of years. And the idea that somehow they did it all through force or trickery is just silly. Um, it discounts all those people's deeply held beliefs that somehow Christianity spoke to something very ancient and powerful. Um, that's bizarre to me. Um, yeah, but I mean, if you go count the number of people that were forcibly converted to Christianity from 0 to 1,000, that's a tiny number. It's a tiny number. Most people are happy to convert to Christianity because it made a ton of sense to them. It made a sense to them. Do you think that Johannes Trithemius was joking when he wrote Stenographia about the whole angel, the angel using angels to transmit information? I don't think so, because it fits very much into the world. It fits very much into the world that Trithemius would have lived in, where angels have the ability to do the kinds of things they could do, like transmitting information really fast. I mean, that's an idea. I really do believe that Trithemius was serious in the Sinographia. I don't think it was a troll, because I really do believe that in a big way, Trithemius was trying to think about not just encoding messages or encrypting them, but I think what's interesting about Trithemius is him as a theorizer of information. The idea that information could be taken out of natural language, repackaged in a different way, and then transmitted through a non-physical means. That's information theory at some level. He's doing information theory, not just cryptography. And so I think that his reputation as a cryptographer actually is a glare around what I would say is an actual much more interesting aspect of Trithemius as a theorist of information, and the idea that information can be transmitted from one type of one encoding system to another, and that obviously that predates Claude Shannon by a chunk of change, and and so insofar as he really um, thinks about information in a pretty radical, interesting way. I do think that Trithemius should be looked at less as an occultist and less as a person interested in stenography or cryptanalysis, and more as an information theorist. And I really find that to be terribly fascinating, actually. So, um, so, um, so yeah, I'm really interested in Trithemius for that reason. I wish more of that stuff was, yeah, I wish more of that stuff was translated, but I don't think that much of it is, unfortunately. Much of it is. All right, about 10 more minutes left. Um, your take on Nostradamus. I need to go reread Nostradamus. I haven't read any stuff by Nostradamus in like 10 years or something. Um, yeah, I need to go back and reread him. I don't know that he predicted the future, but I would like to go back and look at his text again. Um, I haven't looked at that stuff in years, but yeah, that'll be a great an episode to do on Nostradamus. Um, um, yeah, but I mean, again, you can say that they were butchered, but there's no evidence of like widespread butchery among, again, the Christians converting people through in mass. It's just not like through war. And same with Islam. There's not much evidence of that. Um, I know that people really play it up, but Christianity was popular and it was like successful, and it's still successful. I mean, it's still one of the fastest growing religions in the world. It's not my religion, but I think it worked um, because it spoke to people. And at some point, paganism quit doing that, right? Yeah, paganism just quit speaking to people, and Corpus Hermeticum and stuff like that, I think never spoke to many people. Um, yeah, I think it never really spoke to many people. But yeah, but yeah, I mean, many kings and stuff wanted to convert because I mean, again, I'm not saying they converted for good reasons. I'm saying they converted because they wanted to be in on the Christian world because it was good for trade, it was good for commerce, it was good for culture and business. And the Christians were really good at manipulating their religion as part of the larger political agenda of the ancient world. But yeah, I think that they were good at it, and I think that people wanted in on it. Um, so let's see. And even Islam is a weird example because there was even a period where Islam was actively discouraging conversion. They really liked the idea of there being like Muslims at the top of the food chain and everyone else, the dhimmis, being below them. They really liked that setup. And the more people converted in, the more that flattened out society. And so there was actually a push, at least early on, to limit conversion, which again is a very, people I think never hear that version of how Islam spread. Um, Preferred Hermetica translation, Copenhaver, Solomon. The Copenhaver is obviously the better one academically. Um, the Solomon is good because it's a little more poetical, and the Solomon is good because it also contains the Armenian definitions, which the Copenhaver edition doesn't contain. So yeah, folks should. Those are both good translations and worth having, especially because of especially because the you get the Armenian definitions, which is great, which is great. Um, all right, a couple more questions before I jump off. Yeah, again, people can keep saying again, show me the big slaughters of people that weren't converting. Like, where did that happen? Um, in the fifth century, the sixth century, where is that happening? Um, where are these? I mean, again, we people repeat this stuff, right? Again, what's saying with the whole we are the granddaughters of the witches that you couldn't burn. It just the Inquisition didn't work like that. That's just, we have to tell history in I think a more straightforward way, and just showing like, where did these big slaughters by Christians happen? Where did those happen? Um, what we do have is a bunch of rulers would convert to Christianity and basically tell their subjects, "You're going to be Christians," and then their pagan beliefs continued to function basically as paganism in many places all the way up until the 19th century. I mean, I think Lithuania still had some kinds of paganisms, still very much functioning well into the 18th century and stuff like that. So, um, but yeah, um, Yeah, I mean, the things like the burning times and all that stuff, those are interesting ideas from the mid 20th century about the history of witchcraft, um, but the truth of the matter is that they simply weren't witches to burn. There was a conspiracy theory that got out of control and killed many, many people. So yeah, that's the same with the idea that like witches were all wise women that were killed. Most of that's not true. We have good data on that stuff. Um, and the more that we continue to just tell false stories about history, it's just not the way that the witch trials happened. Um, it's just not the way the witch trials happen. Um, yeah, that um, is Lucifer the true hero of Paradise Lost? Thank you. Anti-hero, yeah, yeah, anti-hero. Um, yeah, he's definitely the the anti-hero of it. But hero's a strong word, but yeah, that's where you get the really early the Miltonian Lucifer is really where you begin to get the sort of classic idea of the classic idea of Satan as a kind of anti-hero. So yeah, I would say it begins in many ways in Paradise Lost and continues on from there. Um, but yeah, and ditto with like the Crusades. People are like the Crusades did, yeah, Crusades are mostly killing other Christians. Like the third and I mean, it's amazing how many Christians were killed in the Crusades. Um, um, so yeah, again, yeah, it's like the again the way that we tell the way that we tell the history of this stuff is bizarre. I think. Um, um, yeah, and of course the Christians lied too. I mean um, yeah, the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade was just Christians killing Christians to pay for the Third Crusade. um, the again, yeah, the way that we tell the story is, I think, bizarre. Um, yeah, it's bizarre, and the same with the witch trials and stuff. They get these very strange ideas about the witch trials. Um, um, but yeah, um, yeah, I love. I mean, I'm terribly interested in the trials, but but yeah, it's the way that it happened is very, very different than I think that modern historiography or historiography is a strong word. Modern retellings of it and sort of the neo-pagan community, I think, mostly get it wrong, and also don't really realize there's been a lot of work done on the trials recently. Um, yeah, and there's no such thing as the Abrahamists. I know this is weird anti-Semitic idea that like somehow that Islam, Judaism, and Christianity have shared values. They're enormously different religions. Enormously different religions. So the idea that there's anything shared under the again, even the term Judeo-Christian is a term I just deeply reject. Um, yeah, the idea that that there's a such thing as Judeo-Christianity. I Christianity and Judaism couldn't be more different in many ways. Couldn't be more, and yeah. Yeah, Marco, I totally agree that Judeo-Christian. I never hear anyone use the term Judeo-Christian that's basically not some kind of like trad fascist. Um, yeah, it's like I don't. Yeah, Christianity and Judaism. Yeah, yeah. Brent Jacobs. What would Abraham's religion have been before encountering Yahweh? I guess. I mean, I don't think he was a real person, so I don't know that he existed. But I would say that. I mean, he was probably. I mean, if he existed, he was a Babylonian polytheist. I mean, worship Marduk or something. I don't know. Yeah, yeah. I would say that like worshiping Marduk, but some kind of some local cult. But yeah, I don't think that Abraham existed as a human being. I don't think he was a historical person. He was a historical person. Um, but yeah, I guess if he's from Ur. Who was the big god at Ur? Who was the I mean, was it Enki? Was that the big god at Ur? The patron god of Ur? Every one of the major cities, Ugarit had one. They all the different ones had different main gods. So I think Ur may have been Enki, and so maybe he would have been a devotee of Enki. I don't know, but he didn't exist. So hard to be a hard to be a um, hard to be a have beliefs if you don't historically exist. Oh, Yahweh. Um, was it Nana or Ishtar? I don't know. I don't know what the patron god of there was. Was it Nana, the moon god? Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, he'd have been a moon god person, moon goddess, Inanna, Ishtar. Um, so yeah, there you go. But yeah, like I said, I don't think Abraham was a historical person. Um, yeah, I don't think Yeah, and yeah, it would be bizarre to. I mean, they literally have him coming across from Ur of the Chaldees on a on a camel. Camels weren't even domesticated at that point. So the story just makes no. I mean, it's clearly being written from someone who's living in the period of the domestication of camels. They weren't domesticated even. They wouldn't have been domesticated at that time for sure. So so yeah, you can just see the story's not grounded in anything historical. Yeah, I am. Zeleny, yeah, I am still thinking of doing and wanting to do an episode about about Yahweh. Um, um, I have most of it. I have most of it in my head, but yeah, I need to do it. I want to do it. I find like this Yahweh is one of these perennially interesting characters, and so yeah, I will eventually do one on the origins of Yahweh, who I just find to be a super interesting god who's relatively minor, who should be of no particular importance. It just so happens um, that that this god has become dominant in the world. So yeah, I'll eventually do an episode on Yahweh, who is such a minor, weird little god. Um, but now is a big deal. Now is a big deal. All right. Um, all right, folks. I think I might sign off. I've been on for a couple of hours. Uh, yeah, Yahweh played the long game and won. Yeah, I guess. Or at least the Yahweh was such a vague protean god that it could kind of morph into become all kinds of different things. Um, oh, yeah. Do I ever watch an Irving Finkel? Yes, I do. I love Irving Finkel. He is awesome. Yeah, I really do appreciate him a ton. But yeah, I need to go. Need to watch more of him. But yeah, he's great. I have his book on ghosts that I want to do an episode about at some point, but I haven't had the chance to do it yet. Maybe during spooky season in the fall, I'll do something on ancient ghosts. That would be fun. Wasn't Yahweh a storm god? No, Yahweh did not begin as a storm god. In fact, that's a much later thing where Baal and Yahweh are kind of conflated. That's later. That happens much later in the Iron Age. But no, Yahweh is probably originally a warrior god, um, maybe even a raiding god, but definitely not a storm god. Not until much later. Not until much later. All right, folks. Well, I just want to again. I just want to. I always like to end in the best place I think a person can end on, and that's just expressing gratitude and just really expressing how thankful I am to be surrounded by people like y'all, smart uh, people who are here to like learn about this super weird stuff with me, right? Like I'm literally not, I can teach what I know, but it's also we're learning together, and it's so amazing that I get to hang out with fine people. And I see Marco Visconti in the chat, who I really really appreciate. I'm just really appreciative of all of you who hang out with me, who encourage me to make this material, who leave such kind comments and are just interact in such a uplifting, thoughtful way that makes me feel appreciated in a way that the academy never made me feel. The academy always made me feel as if I were um, redundant, expendable, not really worth having. And so I'm absolutely just really thankful for all of you all for providing a place for me to do this and support my work and support the work of getting these topics and esotericism out there. So thanks again for all of you. Thanks again for your really thoughtful comments. Thanks again for hanging out with me, and thanks again for coming along on this journey that is esoterica, and for being part of the community of people having these conversations around these topics that that otherwise just don't get a ton of a ton of um, just don't get a ton of airtime otherwise. So thank you. Anyone doing Shavuot? I hope you have a really good Shavuot. Eat all the cheesecake and all the things, um, and do some all night learning. I would be going to Shavuot stuff. I was supposed to be teaching at Shavuot tomorrow night, but I'm not doing that because of this whole COVID situation. Um, so I'm gonna be hanging out. There's even a chance I might log on and do something here. Um, 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 yeah, I might log on and do something here and maybe do some learning. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, yeah. Thank you guys, and look forward to getting back on the wagon next week with Ugaritic magic, Bronze Age magic, man, Bronze Age magic. We're gonna look at some Ugaritic magic, Canaanite magic. So we're gonna look at some cool Canaanite magic next week, and then after that, we do some more alchemy stuff. I don't know. But anyway, folks, have a great night. I'm gonna go hang out with my kids and maybe go for a walk or something before Shabbat comes, and then drink some wine, some absinthe, and relax because I could use some good relaxation after this week. This week has been a bit of a shit show. Is that the technical term? That's the technical term. All right, folks. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time for our next hangout, and look forward to next week with Canaanite magic. So, all right, guys, have a great night. Have a great Shabbat if you celebrate the Shabbat, and if you don't, take care of yourself. Relax. You deserve it. Take some time off, and thank you guys all so much. Take it easy.